I've been like trying to figure out. First, I was trying to figure out like what was there that like what have I not taught all the different years. So I hope that this doesn't overlap with stuff I've taught. Any of you guys, who knows, whatever. Anyway, well, I hope not all of it, but okay, we'll see. Anyway. Yeah, exactly. So hopefully it'll be good. And then I was trying to think, so like what would be relevant and whatever. So I figure like Havdallah is something that we do like every single week. So I figure that, that this is something that's always good to get like deeper, meaning deeper significance of, something like Havdallah, that no matter what, like week in, week out, it comes. Okay. So, anyway, okay, so here we go. So let's start. So what I wanted to really ask is, in terms of trying to understand Havdallah, right? Normally, if I would even ask, like, what are the emotions like that you would associate with Havdallah? Like what? Yes, I think so also, right? What else? Yeah, but oh, that's interesting, right? Because we all like, right? Yeah, it's true. But I think even some of the camaraderie is because of almost like the sort of like wistful, like sadness, as we're sort of having like a slow, like, again, I always think like wistful is almost like the word that most comes to mind, of sort of like sad, as we're like, again, sort of sadly saying goodbye to Shabbos, right? And sort of entering the like humdrum, whatever weekday again. However, what I would like to suggest is, I think that there is actually a very, very different approach to Havdallah. The truth is, I think the two can work hand in hand, and I actually think that there are elements of Havdallah that reflect both. But I think that there really is a fundamentally different approach to Havdallah, which is that, and you may have done this, right? Everybody here probably took the mitzvot assays of Shabbos, right? So as you may or may not remember, did I teach any of the assays of Shabbos? Okay, fine. So some of you I even taught, some not, because now I do kashrus. So if I even did the assays, that I might have mentioned some of these ideas, but not all together in like a full like robust year. Anyway, is that generally Havdallah by most is understood as in some ways being the parallel process to Kiddush. However, in what way is it sort of like the parallel process to Kiddush? Meaning, how do most envision as the parallel process to Kiddush? Or what do I mean by that if I say it's the parallel process to Kiddush? The Rambam actually says it the most extreme, which we'll say in a second. But what do we mean by that? Not even in a complicated way. Just like, what would that mean if you said that Havdallah is like the parallel?
If Kiddush is the sanctification of Shabbos and Havdallah is the sending away of Shabbos.
Yes, exactly. Right, exactly that. Right, that what Elisa just said is, if Kiddush is like the sanctification, then Havdallah is sort of sending it away. And to even put it the way, even more particularly that the Rambam puts it, is it really, really the whole mitzvah of Shabbos. Anybody remember what's the pasuk that really? I'm sure you know the pasuk. You might just not realize this. What is the source pasuk for Kiddush? What's Kiddush really about? Is good. Yeah. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho, meaning really, really the idea of Kiddush is remember the Sabbath day to sanctify. Really, like fundamentally, like what is the essence of the mitzvah of Kiddush? What's it meaning? In fact, some sheets would even say that if you even just do this, then you're even yotzei the chiyuv d'oraita. Yes, very nice, right? Some say that if you literally just say good Shabbos to somebody, right, Shabbat Shalom, then you yotzei your chiyuv d'oraita of Kiddush, right? Why would simply saying Shabbat Shalom to somebody, even according to anybody's shita, and again, not everybody agrees, but there are some who say that, and it has halachic ramifications. By the way, really total tangent, but what would in theory be one of the halachic ramifications? In what context? But by women, is the issue is that, by the way, in theory, also perhaps for eating, that's actually interesting, but we might still say to do Havdalah kos, but it's for women. The reason is that what's the deal with us and Kiddush as women? Are we chayav, pater? What's our deal? We are totally chayavot to right to exactly the same as men. Why are we chayavot to right to the same as men? It is a mitzvah asayis non gram. It just comes once a week. But why are we still chayavot the same as men? It's because of Hekesh, the Shomer Zohar Hekesh, right? Because it says in one place in the Sarta Dibro, Zachor Yom HaShabbat, and the other one Shomer Yom HaShabbat, so we link the two. And just like we're for sure chayavot in the Shomer ones, because those are the lot assays, therefore we're also chayav in Zachor, which are the assays, and therefore we are totally chayavot in all aspects of Kiddush. What's fascinating is, what then comes up is what happens on Friday night is which is what happens in many places, though not all, if the man went to shul and davened Mariv, right? So what happens as actually part of what gets said in Mariv is actually the text of Kiddush, right? And therefore, ironically, of course, we kind of as women, especially as Lindenbaum women, right, often like come and are like, oh, well, could I make Kiddush for a man? The irony is some of the Rishonim ask, could a man make Kiddush for a woman? Because if he already went to shul and davened Mariv and basically was yotzei his chiyuv d'oraita of declaring Shabbos sanctified, how can he come home and make Kiddush for his wife, who actually is Chayav D'Oraita. She's got a bigger Chiyuv than him. Anyway, there's many different answers to that, but one of the answers, again, there's many different ones. One of the answers is to say, well, if his wife even said good Shabbos to somebody after she lit candles or whatever it is, then she also was Yotei her Chiyuv D'Oraita, right? What's that?
After I light Shabbos candles, I say good Shabbos to whoever's there.
Good, which is like there's nothing wrong with that. That might mean that you just fulfilled your Chiyuv D'Oraita of the Zachar Yom Shalakacho simply by saying good Shabbos. Anyway, so that's where interestingly it even comes up lehalacha that maybe simply saying good Shabbos is like enough to fulfill your Chiyuv D'Oraita. What that highlights, though, for our purposes, is it really highlights that again that what is the essence of Kiddush? It's declaring Shabbos special and different than the weekdays, meaning. Often people mistakenly think that the mitzvah of Kiddush is to drink wine, and it is not. It very clearly is not. The Chiyuv D'Oraita of Kiddush is to declare Shabbos sanctified. The rabbis later came along and said, in order to give this mitzvah like more gravitas, more kashivut, whatever it is, they said declare that text over wine. But what highlights the fact that the wine is totally secondary? First of all, these things that we just said, like saying davening marav might fulfill his chiyuv, simply saying Gashah. But what else is if you don't have wine Friday night, what can you do? You can make Kiddush over challah. The fact you can make Kiddush over challah highlights the fact that the wine is not, it's not the ikar. Again, it's lechatchila because the rabbi said, say that text over wine, but the ikar is the text recitation of declaring Shabbos sanctified. Okay, all that was really just to develop the point that, again, that is what the mitzvah of Kiddush is about, is declaring Shabbos as different than the weekdays, which is why then, going back to the point I started with, why then does it make sense or that Havdallah would then be like the parallel process at the end? Because just think about logically, if you want to make something like special and separate it from the surrounding things, then you kind of have to do it at both ends. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if you only do it at the beginning end, but then it just kind of like blends into it at the end, and you haven't really separated. To separate, you have to separate it at both ends. And that's why the Rambam actually says that Kiddush and Havdallah are both like together, are sort of two halves of one whole. He says that both Kiddush and Havdallah are part of fulfilling the mitzvah d'oraita of Zachar Yom Hashbalakacho. They are both part of that mitzvah d'oraita, and they're sort of two parts of it, which is why, by the way, for the Rambam, what's then the deal with us women, meaning what's our chiyuv in Chayav D'Oraita, even in Havdallah, we could even both say Kiddush for a man and be moti a man, and we could say Havdallah for a man and be moti a man, or whatever it is, because he says that really Kiddush and Havdallah are literally two halves of the same whole. They're both about designating Shabbos as separated. If you separate it the first, and you have to all separate it at the other end.
Well, I feel women really should make.
Good. So we'll get to that, which is not really our topic, but since we're mentioning it, it's a cool idea.
Why
Yeah.
don't you start Shabbos with Kiddush then, or is that what the
Friday night, by the way, the Friday night Kiddush is the D'Oraita one. The Shabbos day one is really just Rabbanit. It's the Friday night one at its inception that really starts it.
We start Shabbos with candles.
So we start Shabbos with candles. That's interesting.
Is that why there's candles in Havdallah too?
I mean, in theory, that's interesting. I mean, in theory, yes, but I really think, even though you're right, like Shabbos sort of starts even once you even say like Mizmor Shiur Chanukah, Mizmor Shiur, what's it called? You know, the Shabbos one that starts. Exactly, yes, Mizmor Shiur, that one. What's it called? Is let's call it anyway. That kind of also like sort of is like, you know, Kabbalat Shabbat and declare Shabbat, like start Shabbos. But the Friday night, when you're right, it's interesting. You almost think that we should say Kiddush to like really start it instead of the Hadlakat Road. It's interesting. I don't know. I'd have to check into that. It's a good question. In any case, but point being, just very briefly, in terms of the why then do we not, is because there's a second sheet about Havdallah, which is that Havdallah is really Drabanan, that really, again, the Rambam really says they're both right. They're literally two parts of the same whole. The other Shita says it's Drabanan, that really Zachar Yom Hashbalakacho is fulfilled through Kiddush at the outset. It was the rabbis who came and said, you know what, if you separate it at the beginning, you really ought to also separate the end, and it's rabbinic. Now, even that Shita, which still say that we women are still chayav, and we're chayav the same as a man, meaning we're only Drabanan, but so is he only Drabanan. The whole thing of Havdallah is Drabanan, and we could be motzi a man. So, okay, still, why don't women do it then? There's a third Shita, which is actually the one that's going to be relevant even for what we'll get to, which says, it's actually very cool, which says that Havdallah is not the last mitzvah of Shabbos, which is bookending, again, the way that the Rambam really views it is, it's really the last mitzvah of Shabbos. We're bookending Shabbos. We're declaring Shabbos as special and separated and different at its beginning with Kiddush and at its end by Havdallah, and they're really like the closing bookends, right? That sandwich Shabbos. This other Shita says, no. Yes, Havdallah is parallel to Kiddush, but not in that way of bookending Shabbos. It's that in the same way as Kiddush initiates and sanctifies Shabbos at its inception, so too what does Havdallah do? It initiates and sanctifies Chol at the beginning of Chol. And according to that, if we view Havdallah that way, then Havdallah is not the last mitzvah of Shabbos, but what? It's the first mitzvah of Chol. And if Havdallah is the first mitzvah of Chol, then what happens to us women?
No.
Then good, why no? Because exactly, because it's a mitzvah aseh shazman grama. Now, normally, if it's a part of Shabbos, then the hekesh between shamar and zachor overrides our mitzvah aseh shazman grama exemption rather. But if it's the first mitzvah of Chol, then it's a mitzvah aseh shazman grama with nothing there to override it, and then we're exempt. It's because of that third possibility, even though 2 of the 3 interpretations of Havdallah would say that we women are chayiv the same as a man and could be motzi a man. That third shita says that it's mitzvah chol and women are pturot, and that therefore we couldn't be motzi man, and we're choshesh for that possibility, and that's why we generally try, if there's a man available, whatever, not to. Anyway, okay, but it's that shita, and again, in the end, I really think there's truth to both, but it's that shita, this idea of saying that, wow, it's like a whole different perspective of Havdallah, that instead of viewing Havdallah as the last mitzvah of Shabbos, but it's saying, no, Havdallah really actually is about initiating and sanctifying Chol. So that's the idea that I want us to sort of like focus on and develop here. Okay, so in order to be able to even like understand what might that mean, what do we mean by that? We have to first really understand basically malacha, because malacha is sort of like the defining. It's so good. And I saw that you called. I was in the middle of actually teaching something else on Zoom, so we could talk after. Yeah. What's it called? I teach essential sugyot on Sundays, whatever, to women. Anyway, to adults. Zoom. Anyway, but point being, okay, so right, so we have to understand malacha, because malacha, here you can have a sheet. Malacha is really what is essentially what kind of right defines almost halachically the difference between like Shabbos and Chol, right? Malacha is what we can resume. That's what Havdallah enabled, right? Is doing malacha again. So what is the deal with this malacha thing? What's it all about? Where does it come from? So the fascinating thing is, probably if I ask you guys, right? You guys tell me, right? Where does malacha come from? How do we know what constitutes malacha? Right? Where do we look? Where do Chazal look? The Mishkan, exactly. The Mishkan, right, looks to the Mishkan. And we sort of grow up knowing that from like a relatively young age, sort of one of those things that we learn, right? The Lamet HaMalachot, or from the Lamet things that went into building the Mishkan. Okay, but I don't know if you ever took a step back to think about it. It seems to make no sense, right? Meaning, we're told, right? Why do we have to keep Shabbos? To remember that, right? I'm sure we all learned this in like even before first grade, right? Why do we keep Shabbos? Again, the simple answer, the straightforward answer, nothing complex, right? Why do we keep Shabbos? That God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day, and therefore we do the same thing. In which case, it should actually be glaringly obvious that if you were Chazal, right? Because the whole thing is God says, right, on Shabbos don't do malacha, but he doesn't define in the Torah what he wants us not to do. But if you were Chazal and it was your job to figure out, well, what is this malacha thing that God wants us not to do on Shabbos? And we know it's like straight out, right? That God created the world in 6 days, rested on the 7th, and therefore he tells us to do the same thing. So where would you look in the Torah to try to figure out, well, what's this malacha thing that like Jews can't
not create a world?
But basically, but you're at the narrative of creation, look for all the verbs that describe how God created the world, and that should be what we can't do on Shabbos. What, sorry? Oh, so it's true. Thank goodness that we can't speak, right? So it's interesting, but I'm just saying, like, so first of all, maybe that's some of it. Maybe they tried to do, and then we're like, oh, we can't tell the Jews not to talk. So, right? So perhaps actually, who knows? Maybe they had a half a minute to do. Then they were like, no, this cannot work. Second try.
And then we also say Mitzrayim, and then maybe the Beit HaMikdash is like linked, like the whole point.
That's interesting, meaning because we sort of like, maybe, but I'll even go a step further, right? Essentially, what we're trying to do then is figure out, why do they abandon the more seemingly obvious creation narrative? In fact, even if for whatever reason, creation's not going to work, right? Like the speech thing and whatever, but still, like, why would the Mishkan be even like the second best thing? Like, it just seems weird and like unlinked. Like, just where does that even come from to say, oh, well, let's look at what they did to build the Mishkan, say what you can't do on Shabbos? Just like apples and oranges. What does one have to do with the other?
Like, that's the next creative thing to look to, especially if it takes up a lot of space.
But good. So we're going to look at that. Excellent. So we're going to get there. Before we even get there, though, we are heading there, is if you take a look, this is what I brought on the source sheet, is you can see, right? So even you guys can see right here, is that I actually am totally convinced that it's actually the pshat of the Torah, that it's not actually Chazal who kind of did these crazy, hermeneutic, whatever, twist themselves into a pretzel to try to define Malach on Shabbos by Malach in the Mishkan. I actually think it's literally pshat of the Torah. Why? Because crazily enough, first of all, even just to start off, the Torah clearly indicates that somehow like creation and Shabbos, that Mishkan and Shabbos are totally intertwined. If you look both in Shemot Perek Lamed Aleph, which is on the source sheet, and Shemot Perek Lamed Hey, you'll see that in both, it's really the primary topic of both prakim are the Mishkan, and yet God starts or ends in whichever case, like in Shemot Perek Lamed Aleph, he just went through the entire long description of the Mishkan and then ends with a total non sequitur about Shabbos. And then in Shemot Perek Lamed Hey, similarly, when Moshe's telling it over, he starts with a non sequitur about Shabbos and then goes into the Mishkan. It's just weird. But clearly the fact, especially that it happens twice, shows there's some connection between Mishkan and Shabbos.
That's so weird. Because when I did 99 and these prakim, and I saw them, I have them big stuff in the Tanakh, and I said, why are they relevant here?
Meaning, it's exactly. Every year that Libby was just saying, right, that when she was even just learning it in 929, she noticed it and circled and was like, was this relevant here? What on earth is Shabbos? It is a total non sequitur. It should jump out at us as seeming to be non-connected. But the fact that it happens twice, both in Perek Lamed Aleph and in Lamed Hey, shows there's something going on here. But then it goes more, because take a look at actually what it says here. Look at the words that keep getting used. Look at the beginning of Shemot Perek Lamed Aleph, right? I underlined it, so I kind of gave it away, right? But look, it says, "Vayidber Shem Moshe lemor. Re'ei karati b'shem Etzal ben Uri ben Chol Mata Yehuda. V'malei oto ruach Elokim b'chachma v'tuna." Right? Basically, I'm going to fill him with all this wisdom, right? Uvechol melacha. And then lachshov machshvot lasopos havakad. I'm going to fill him with all this wisdom, right? B'tzal, right? All this artistic ability to create and whatever. U'b'charoshet even l'malot v'charosh te'ilasot b'chol melacha. Meaning over and over and over again. And look, if you actually jump down to Perek Lamed Hey, starting from the Pasuk Lamed, it's really all over the place. Look, over and over, right? You see where I am in the second set, Shmos Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Lamed. Vayomer Hashem Vayomer Moshe el Bnei Yisrael, Ru'u Arai Kara Hashem B'Shem Etzal ben Uri ben Chol Mata Yehuda, V'Malei Oto Ruach Elokim B'Chachma V'Tvana V'Dat B'Chol Melacha. Again, God filled B'Tzal with all this wisdom, so B'Chol Melacha, L'Chshov Machshavot, whatever, and then again, at the end of Pasuk Lamed Gimel, he says, that term melechet machshevet, which we use to define exactly the type of work you can't do on Shabbos, it comes from the Mishkan, right? Ula robli bo, right? And again, you say maleo toru chachmat lev laso komalacha, komalachet chirish v'choshevet, and then again, komalacha. Point being, the word malacha shows up over and over and over and over again in the description of the Mishkan, and shows up over and over and over again in what God tells us not to do on Shabbos, in the self same prakim. But where it gets even, I think, more obvious that God is telling us to define one by the other is, by Shabbos, God says, don't do malacha on Shabbos. And then the Torah is maddeningly silent about what is this malacha thing that you don't want me to do on Shabbos. But then in the self-same prakim, uses the word malacha over and over again to describe what was done in the Mishkan. And by the Mishkan, we almost have maddening detail. Do you know what I'm saying? By Shabbos, it's maddeningly silent. What's it called, right? It's by Shabbos, it's so frustrating that it doesn't define this critical malacha thing. And by the Mishkan, it's the opposite. What do I mean again by the Mishkan, it's the opposite? It's detail upon detail upon detail. It's enough already. But point being, the fact that the Torah goes out of its way in such minutia, in such detail, defining exactly what went into building the Mishkan, and uses the word malacha over and over again, right, to capture what that is. And it has 13 chapters, more chapters than any other topic in the entire Torah, describing exactly what went into building the Mishkan. They use the word malacha. If in the self-same chapters, it's so fun to see everybody. I didn't know she is. So good to see you.
You keep saying this.
Oh,
She is.
oh, for real? She's actually. Welcome everybody. Anyway, point being that I really think it's the total shot of the Torah that God is trying to tell us this malacha thing that I'm telling you not to do on Shabbos. Clearly, it's the same thing. Again, it's in the same chapters. He uses the word malacha, right? By Mishkan, by Shabbos. By Shabbos doesn't define it. By Mishkan gives detail upon detail upon detail describing it. Uses the same word. Obviously, the thing he's telling us, don't do malacha on Shabbos, obviously is the malacha thing that he told us in, like, do you know what I'm saying? That actually seems very clear to be the pshat. However, even once we understand that really, I'm totally convinced that it's the absolute pshat of Torah to define malacha that we can't do on Shabbos by malacha that went into building the Mishkan, all that does is kick the question up a level, meaning we started by saying, why would Chazal abandon creation narrative in favor of the Mishkan to define what you can't do on Shabbos? But so now we said, oh, because that's what God is clearly telling us to do in the Torah. Except now what's the question? Why does God abandoned the creation narrative in favor of the Mishkan? Do you know what I'm saying? So now we understand why Chazal did it. Chazal did it. It's so exactly what God is telling us to do in the pshat of the Torah, except it still doesn't answer the question. It just bumps it up a level of like, what's God thinking? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, why does God want us to define what we can't do on Shabbos by what went into building the Mishkan? So interestingly, probably the most famous treatment of this question was Abraham Joshua Heschel's In the Sabbath. Any of you read it? It's like a pretty short read. What, sorry?
I said I read part of it.
Oh, cool. Anyway, so Abraham Joshua Heschel, I recommend, it's cool, book, and it's relatively short. It's like 100 pages, like you could read it in like a sitting. Anyway, but the point being, he probably has the most famous treatment. And what he says, but you'll see I disagree, but whatever, we'll talk about it in a minute. But first, just to say what he says, it's a cool idea anyway. He suggests that he thinks that one of the greatest innovations of Torah is the idea that sanctity of time beats out sanctity of place, right? That like it's more sort of like human but also in some ways like more primitive to like a space, right? Something physical that you can touch on, whatever it is, that sort of the intuition and certainly the, predominant belief of the time was that like, sanctity of space, that has, real teeth to it. Sanctity of time, what's time? I can't even touch it, see it, fail, whatever it is. And that one of the great innovations of Torah that the Torah is expressing through this idea of malacha is telling you on Shabbos, when you have sanctified time, that beats out, that trumps, that has more power than sanctified space. And therefore the idea is the sanctity of Shabbos tells you don't do malacha, stop sanctified space. The sanctity of time beats that out. And that's what he thinks is going on here in this malacha equation. Is you have these two malachas, you have malach of Shabbos, malach of the Mishkan, and the idea of Shabbos is saying the sanctity of Shabbos beats out the sanctity of the Mishkan, and therefore we define what you can't do on Shabbos by the Mishkan to say when you have like sanctified time, sort of like that beats out, that trumps, and so you stop the Mishkan.
I don't really like that because
I totally disagree. Yeah, but why? I'm curious here why.
Like the circles don't make it seem like they're competing forces at all, and like it almost like is like comparing them to like unite the two and like showing that there's like that they're equal, not that one.
Good. So I agree with you, and I'm going to develop it even more, but I totally agree with you. But good, but let's even hear more why. Excellent. So we're going to come to that. Excellent. So first, let me explain why. She just said we do use them. So, I'll say it because you already pointed out, I think it's so powerful is, well, actually, I take it back. I'm going to come to that idea in 1 second, but shkayach, I'm going to come to it in 1 second. But first, let me just say, when I read it once, like on a Shabbos, literally, again, it's like 100 pages. You can like sit on the couch and just like read it, like, I don't know, like straight there. And it's relatively easy. It's like English, whatever. Anyway, and I was reading it, and again, he's very poetic. He's a great writer. Again, I recommend reading. It's very famous also. So like it's just one of those things good to read because people talk about it. And The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, just literally called Sabbath. Anyway, and I remember like reading it, and it was like bothering me, but I like couldn't put my finger on like why I didn't agree. Do you know what I'm saying? One of those things where I was like, this is really famous and like it's nice reading. He's like very convincing. And again, he's a great writer and whatever. And then I finally hit on it in terms of, and then I'll come to Lisa's idea in a minute, but just what I thought it was wrong. I was like, that's just not true. Like if you really read the Torah, I just don't think that's true. I don't think that's the idea of the Torah. So now see if you can prove why. Again, it like took me a while to like hit on why it was bothering me. And then I was like, because I don't think that's what the Torah is saying in other places. I'm saying.
It's the house of God. Why would we like, we don't want God to be in the house.
But excellent. First of all, it's just weird. Exactly. What are we trying to say? We don't want God's house or whatever. Excellent. But let's even say, meaning what I suddenly had like realized, I was like, I don't think that's what the Torah is saying. I think the Torah absolutely places, I wouldn't say the Torah places more value here, Libby. I agree with you. I don't think it places more value on sanctity of place, but I would say it's equal. I don't think the Torah is trying to tell you that sanctity of place like is second fiddle.
You need the you can't have the time without the place.
Good. First of all, we need a place. Good. Where do we see, by the way, that the best way to celebrate sanctified time is in sanctified space? So kids first of all, excellent. I wasn't even thinking that, but that's true, right? That like the whole thing is like you celebrate it in, right? Which I even think is the Mishkan, because I think the Mishkan is like a highlight of Judaism or whatever it is. Excellent. But even what else? The Shalosh Regalim, on the Shalosh Regalim, right? These like highly sanctified time. We don't like negate sanctified space. The best way to celebrate our high holidays. Good, absolutely. But I'm saying, but the best way is to go and celebrate them in the holy place. So like, how could we say that the whole idea is that, oh, sanctified time beats out sanctified space, if actually the best way to celebrate sanctified time is by going to sanctified space? Correct, not the only, but I'm saying, but it's weird if he's trying to say that the idea of like sanctified time in Torah and like Shabbat, whatever it is like to almost, I don't say negate entirely. Obviously, he would agree it's not negated, but like, correct, that's what I'm saying. He's not negated, correct. But we'll go through more about why I don't even think it trumps it. Yeah, what else?
I really like the idea, I've always liked the idea of us setting the dates for the Chagim and it being in our hands. And I think that sanctity of place is something outside of yourself, of like sanctity of time, it will be Shabbat no matter where you are. But for like God or the Torah to say it's not Shabbat unless you're at home in Teaneck, or it's not Shabbat unless you're in the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem even. And then we know that Jews go into exile. And the whole point of Judaism is that it's transportable. I think that's also part of Mishkan. Like, yes,
although that would actually support Heschel, what you're saying, which is fine. You can support him. You can agree with him. Oh, no, I'm trying to say like why I disagree with Heschel, but I totally hear. But let me even just repeat your idea. Because again, I definitely think there's something to it. And like, again, it's a great book and he's a great thinker, whatever, is what Abby was just saying, which would support it, is to say that really sanctified time does beat out sanctified space. The fact that we're partners with God in created sanctifying time. But by the way, I would actually argue that we're partners with him also in creating sanctified space. We have to build it and then he comes. But even so, the fact that even when we're in Galut, we still have Shabbos, we still have Chagim, we still have whatever it is, shows that it's not contingent on a place. At the same time, I would still say that what's the very first command that God gives Abraham by which we sort of become the chosen people? What, sorry, is? Oh, that's interesting. So but even before Brit Milah, he gives him Lech Lecha, right? The whole way he chooses Abraham is Lech Lecha me'aretz right? Go to the land that I will show you. So it's hard to say it's not like central when that is like the first thing. But I would say even more than that, I would really like argue that to a large degree. And again, this is not an Aliyashi or whatever it is, but the reality is, I would really almost say that the entire Torah is about the march to Eretz Yisrael, right? Except with the simple exclusion of Bereshis, right? Where it's not all about that, but even there you still have messages about that, right? Like Yitzchak isn't supposed to leave the land and whatever it is, but certainly starting from actually from this week's parsha, right? This week's parsha is when they leave or left, right? Whatever, to go down to Egypt. And then the entire rest, sorry, you'll make it back if you want to. Oh, you look so sad. Oh, yeah. Anyway, but point being is that like I really think that the entire rest, all of Shemot, right? Vayikra is mostly laws, but all of Bamidbar, all of Devarim, it's all about the march to this land. I mean, that's like what the entire story is about. And honestly, even all of like Nach, right? Nevi'im and Ketuvim, it's all about like the land. The land is central. It's not incidental. It's like really like what the whole thing is about. And in fact, putting it also there is in terms of even like say talking about Brit and covenant, right? There's two critical ingredients in the covenant with God of how we know when God is like passing on the covenant to like who's the next chosen son or whatever it is, right? What are the two critical ingredients in when God is sort of showing, oh, you're the next chosen one in the link, right? Meaning the bracha that he gives like to Yaakov or to Yitzchak to show that like you're the chosen one. Land and children, right? It's not time and children, right? Meaning land is it's 50% of the covenant. What, sorry? Well, oh, that's interesting, right? One could argue that children are time, it's sort of continuity. That's actually very beautiful. So one could say, but exactly, meaning because again, I'm not trying to argue that the land is more than time. I actually would argue they're equal, which actually that would be very perfect and that would fit. If you say children is about the continuity of time, and then the land, perfect, meaning that's because I think they're equal, but that's sort of my point. That when reading it, I was sort of feeling unsettled. It's because I don't think that's the message of Torah. I do not think that the Torah downplays sanctity of place. I really don't think so. Like the Beit HaMikdash is so central. The Mishkan, as we said, receives more face time in the Torah than any single other topic in the entire Torah. Like, how could you say that, oh, the whole message is to like downplay it? It gets more face time than else. I just was like, I just don't actually think that that's really what the Torah is saying. Okay, but if it's not what the Torah is saying, then we're still stuck to the question. Meaning, If the Torah is, meaning he was coming to answer that question of why do we define malacha? Why do we define that which has to stop on Shabbos by what went into the Mishkan? So he was saying, clearly, right, sanctified time trumps sanctified space. If we're not going to go with that answer, then we have to have a different answer to the question still. So why is Mishkan what we have to stop on Shabbos? And here's where I would bring in your idea. Yeah, do you want to say it again?
Well, now I've expanded it. If Bereshit is God creating our home, then us creating God's home, we have to stop.
You're actually okay. I'm going to say your first idea, and then I'll come to this idea. Okay, the idea that Elisa said 5 minutes ago that I'm going to bring in now was that it's actually an amazing and such critical point. What stops on Shabbos?
You go, Mayo. Skip back.
Is that anyway? What he says is that what stops on Shabbos is not service in the Mishkan. This is what Elisa said 5 minutes ago, right? We don't stop avoda in the Mishkan. What do we stop on Shabbos? We stop building the Mishkan. We stop constructing the place, but we don't stop using it, and that's critical. I really like, again, as I said, I actually think I really think he's like wrong. No, again, it's a beautiful idea. I recommend reading it, but once you realize that, and again, Elisa Shkaf, you realized that already, right, 5 minutes ago, that's the key. It cannot be that the message is that sanctified time beats sanctified space, because we don't stop using sanctified space. Usher on Shabbos to go into the Mishkan or to enter the Beit HaMikdash, it's the opposite, right? On Shabbos, right? We don't stop that. We bring the carbon tamid at the end, right? So bring the carbonot in theory violates certain malachot, right? You can't kill an animal on Shabbos. For a carbon, you can. So he's saying that sanctified time beats out sanctified space, because it's not true. We go to the Mishkan, we go to the Mikdash, we continue the avoda. So then what is it that happens? Is that where do we learn malacha from that we can't do on Shabbos? It's not from what went into service of God in the Mishkan or in the Beit HaMikdash. It's what went into constructing them. All the places that we look at, all these equations between the word malacha and these prakim that we were looking at, is what went into building the Mishkan is what was called malacha and melechet machshevet. And then it actually has such a different idea that I actually think is so beautiful and so powerful, which is, what is it that we have to stop on Shabbos? We have to stop building sanctified places. Why? And this, Elisa, now I think is, actually, I'll get to your idea in 1 second. Let me first do one more piece, and then I'm going to add that, which is, what's then the idea of Shabbos is sometimes we could be so frenetic in our building that we sometimes forget to stop and smell the roses, as they say, to stop and enjoy the whole goal of winning. If we're working the whole time to build sanctified space for God, which is the whole idea of the Mishkan, right? But we don't ever take the time to just be with God. Then what was the point of building the space for him? Do you know what I'm saying? Meaning the whole idea on Shabbos is to stop building the Mishkan, but not to suddenly put up a police barrier and no more going into the Mishkan on Shabbos because sanctified time beats out sanctified space. No, it's stop use that sanctified space, stop building it so that you can just be in it and be with God in that sanctified space, which is why avoda totally continues and even increases with the Karban Musaf and everything like that. And that's why on the Shalosh Regalim, we do sanctified time in sanctified space. What stops is the construction, which is unbelievable and is then such a different idea. And then I even want to add Elisa's next idea, which is that what's very cool is there are actually even a lot of parallels between creation and the Mishkan. If you look, I just brought a few here in the chart on the bottom of the sheet. Hey guys, what's it called? Where here's the two most blatant ones. The Midrash brings actually lots more even. Where if you look at the chart, right, where it says "Vatechel kol avadat mishkan ohel moed vayechal Moshe tamalacha," you can't miss it, right? It's so parallel to what we say in Kiddush every week. Vayechul hashmayim v'aretz kol tvan vayechal Elokim, right? It's so similar. And if you look then at the next one as well, Vayar Moshe et kol hamalacha v'nei asu ota kasher tzivah Hashem kein asu vayevarach ota Moshe. Right, look at the Bereshit one by creation. Vayar Elokim et kol asher asa v'nei tov moed vayevarach Elokim et tumash v'yekasher. Right, it's again, it's so parallel.
But then why is Kiddush quoted from creation and not from the Mishkan?
Wait, sorry, say it again.
I said, why is Kiddush quotes from creation, like psukim from creation and not from the Mishkan?
So I still think that almost like the pshat, so to speak, of like Kiddush and that we're sanctified in keeping Shabbos is that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, and that's what we do, and therefore that's the psukim that we quote in Kiddush, which is why it highlighted my question from the beginning of, so then let's not do creation verbs, you know what I'm saying, on Shabbos. But now actually we'll get to it more, which is to bring in now the second idea that Eliza had said, and actually this was an idea that I saw in an article by Rav Alex Israel, if any of you take his classes or took his classes or whatever, so bringing it all in. Was he wrote an article where he brought a lot of the parallels between creation and the Mishkan, and he basically said, so Baruch Shekivanta Lisa to Rav Alex's idea, where he really, it's very beautiful, where I think it's such a cool idea, where he basically says, God did his act of creation. What did God do in his act of creation? What did God create? He created a world for us, right? And then what's the one thing almost that like, I don't say that God can't create, but almost like Kiviyachol is, he can't, like, meaning what he wants is for us to then like serve him and create space for him. But like, in other words, that's what's like this such cool like duality is God's act of creation is to create a world for us. And what he then wants for us to do is to complete his act of creation by creating space for him. Isn't that awesome, right? Like he creates space for us, and then we create space for him. That's what the Mishkan is, right? And that's why there's all these parallels, because it's our act of creation. And that's why there's even all this language of like creativity, right? Like melechet machshevet, and even all those words that we were seeing earlier where he was describing about like Bitzalel. And I don't know about you, but ever in reading it, were you ever like, all right, like, I don't know, like, it doesn't really need all that. Like, it's almost like the Torah is trying to give us this message of the Mishkan was literally bringing every possible human talent and creativity and ability to its like fullest climax in creating space for God, right? So again, God brings his like creative elements like to full expression, creating space for us. And he then commands us to use our creative abilities to create the space for him. And that's how we kind of like partner with God in creation. And therefore, if we understand that that's really what the Mishkan is, then it makes so much sense. And it's like so beautiful that that's what we're like doing, right? God created the world. We then spend all week building this Mishkan, so to speak, building space for God, which is really the whole idea, right? And then on Shabbos rest and stop building it so that we can enjoy the space with God. Now, here's then where it finally ties into Havdallah in, I think, such a powerful way. What I really think that perhaps though the most powerful message though that is expressed by God telling us to define what we cannot do on Shabbos, malacha, right? That we define it by what went into building the Mishkan is, so on the one hand, again, he tells us to stop that on Shabbos, so that we make sure to stop the creative, right, creating of space, that we can just enjoy being with God, right? But then we make Havdallah. And what does Havdallah enable us to resume? Malacha. What's the incredibly powerful message that's conveyed by God defining malacha by what went into building the Mishkan? Again, the malacha that we have to stop on Shabbos, and therefore that we resume on Motzei Shabbos, that Havdallah enables us to resume, is defined by Melechet HaMishkan, by Melechet Machshevet of the Mishkan. I think the incredible idea that he's conveying to us is when we make Havdallah each Motzei Shabbos and resume malacha, we should have in mind that the malacha that we're resuming each Motzei Shabbos as Shabbos ends should be like Mishkanesk Melechet Machshevet. What do I mean by that? It's that it shouldn't be this like wistful, sad, oh, Shabbos is really like what I live for, and like a Chol kind of stinks, but like what can we do? We have to go through Chol till we can get to the next Shabbos. I think Shabbos is awesome, and that's when we get to spend time enjoying being with God. And then we make Havdallah and sort of, have to like stop the vacation. Of course, that there is a sadness to that, but at the same time, we should be excited to resume the malacha that we're resuming. Why? Because what should that malacha be modeled on? The Mishkan. What does that mean? It means that the idea that they're conveying to us is, as we resume the malacha that we're then going to spend the next 6 weeks 6 days engaged in, is supposed to be geared towards building space for God and creating space for God in this world. So that then comes the next Shabbos, and we stop from that and enjoy whatever our malacha of that week created. And then again, we make Havdallah and again resume malacha. But the idea of the malacha is, and I think part of the idea of defining malacha by Malechet HaMishkan is not only too much we focus on, oh, that's defining what we have to stop when Shabbos starts. And by the way, I think there is value that we stop building the Mishkan so that we can just enjoy being with God. But I think equally important is to ask, well, why is that what defines what we start again? Do you know what I'm saying? We ask the question by like, why is malacha what we have to not do on Shabbos? Why does Shabbos demand the cessation of malacha? But I think perhaps equally important is to say, malacha is what we resume when we make Havdallah. And I think Havdallah, remember how we started that I think that just like Kiddush sanctifies Shabbos at the beginning, I think Havdallah sanctifies the resumption of Chol. And what do I mean? I think it's meant to remind us, and in a second I'll explain why, that the malacha we're resuming should be modeled on malacha of the Mishkan, should be work that as we're doing it, whatever it is, in whatever college you're in whatever major you're in and whatever it is, I think every single one of us, in whatever it is that we're doing in life, there are ways to find avenues and paths in whatever we're doing to use that to create space for God and to make a Kiddush Hashem and to bring God into our lives through the math, the science, the reading, the literature, whatever it is. I think there are ways to like take whatever malacha we are engaged in during the week and make it melechet machshevet of the Mishkan. And that, I think, is the idea of defining malacha by the Mishkan, because the Mishkan was all about creating space for God. And I think that's the message to us when we make Havdallah is the malacha we're resuming, not just the malacha we stopped, but the malacha we're resuming should be with that as its goal, is how am I going to use the work that I'm excited to do? We should be excited. Like that's what I'm saying. I don't think malacha, that Havdallah should only be sad. It should also be, I hope that you're all loving whatever it is that you're engaged in and doing now. And you should, and embrace it. And as you're loving it and embracing it, I think the message really is to look for how can I use whatever it is that I'm studying, working at, doing, whatever it is, how can I build, like turn it into like Mishkan Malacha? Do you know what I'm saying? How can I make whatever it is that I'm doing, working, studying, whatever it is, how can I use it as a way, as an avenue for bringing God more into my life, more into the world, because that's what our 6 days of the week are supposed to be about, doing whatever it is that we're doing, but doing it with that as the goal of bringing God more into our lives and more into the world. And then we have Shabbos, when we stop the building and the creating and the doing to enjoy what we've hopefully done and created during the 6 days. And then we make Havdallah and start again building and being active. And again, we should embrace it and be excited about it, whatever we're engaged in. But again, doing it with that goal of bringing God more into our lives, and then have Shabbos, just again, Shabbos where we enjoy it. By the way, just to even sum that up, is I think that we see that in Havdallah in several ways. First of all, what's the bracha that we insert Havdallah into, which I don't know about you, but I was always like surprised about it. There's no other insertions in that bracha, right? Like exactly in Atachonin Ladam Da'at, right? Why does that fit? I think because it's all about like wisdom and right. That's sort of like the idea of like Melechet Machshevet is right. Like Batzalel was like the smartest, the most creative. It's like taking all of human abilities to like their highest possibility. That's where we put Havdallah. Why are we putting it there? I think it's because there's this idea of, yes, be this wise being. Don't just like negate yourself. Like embrace that. Thank you for giving me talents and wisdom and abilities. And now my idea is to be Mavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, but use my Chol to again to create more space for God and then have Shabbos again. But I think it's very fitting that's in that bracha. It's again, I think it's built on this idea of like Batzalel and human creativity. Not only that, but going back to whatever it was who asked about Kiddush with the light. Was that you also? Somebody asked about, what's it called? About even the fact that we like the, I would actually say, again, just to tie into what I started with, I think both perspectives of Havdallah are true. Meaning, and I think even the fact that we insert really the Ikar of Havdallah, just like we said, the Ikar of Kiddush, what is the text recitation declaring Shabbos special. So too with Havdallah, the Ikar of Havdallah is really the last paragraph about, that's really the Ikar, which by the way, just important to know, if you ever are in a place or situation where you don't have a candle or don't have the samim, still make Havdallah, say like that last paragraph. And do it over wine is because again, Chazal we're mataking that way. By the way, when do we do that all the time? Make Havdallah over wine, but without the besamim and the ner. Yom Tov, exactly. It totally exists, right? The idea of not whatever. But I think that those insertions or those additions Onto the Ikar. Again, the Ikar is the text recitation declaring Shabbos different than Chol, which is that last bracha. Because I'm talking do it over wine, right, to give it more chashibut. Where did the Havdallah and the candle and the Besamim come from? I think both of those additions, I think, reflect the two different perspectives of Havdallah, meaning Besamim, right? It's kind of weird, but if any of you remember, what's the idea behind Besamim? It's like these weird, like, right, exactly, either because you're smelling the fires of Gehenna that are resuming, or you just lost your neshama yetera, and so now you're all like weak and you need to smell the besamim to like revive you because you're all weak. The point being that I think very much reflects the other perspective of Havdallah, that it is sad and wistful and we're losing our neshama yetera and the fires of Gehenna are resuming and whatever it is. And like, I think besamim very much reflect Shabbos is awesome, whole things sound like we're kind of sad that we're now going from Shabbos to Chol, and we need these besamim to like revive ourselves, because really like chaval that we have to go from the Kedusha of Shabbos to Chol. So I think Besamim totally capture that. The candle, on the other hand, I think totally reflects the idea that we were just developing, which is that Havdallah is also in some way could be a joyous embracing of Chol, and that it could be a very holy endeavor that we're going to engage in of, again, building space for God that we'll then enjoy next week. But how does the candle reflect that? Why do we light the candle on Motzei Shabbos? What does that reflect?
Fire.
Good, it's fire. So first of all, it simply symbolizes the fact that we're now resuming malacha. So first of all, the fact that we start by lighting a candle is showing we're embracing our resumption of malacha. And right, the Midrash says that it was on Motzei Shabbos, on the very first Motzei Shabbos, that God showed Adam Harishon how to create fire. Meaning fire represents in many ways God showing man and giving over to man creativity and the ability to be a godlike creator using the different things God has given us. And right away, Motzei Shabbos, we do this act of malacha that represents and captures human creativity that God has granted us the ability to do. So I really think that in many ways, the Besamim represents like the sort of sad, wistful, like we're losing our neshama yetera, we need to revive ourselves. And the candle represents this embracing of there's something also very wonderful and exciting about starting a new week and having the ability to use the God-given creativity and talents and abilities that God has given us to create more space for God in this world in whatever way we can. And then to bring us to the next Shabbos where we'll stop the creation and just enjoy being with God in whatever we've created and then start again, the cycle again.
Why would this be the fire in your nail?
Oh, by the way, I even think that fits the Tachonim. It's about distinguishing. The whole idea is Havdallah and being able to distinguish between Kodesh and Chol and Israel and the Amim and whatever it is. And so the idea of looking is to distinguish between your nails and your skin. It's about being able to see, or really they also talk about being able to distinguish between different kinds of coins, but you just often don't have coins with you. But you always have your fingers with you. But point being, the idea is just to be using the light to be able to do Havdallah, to do some type of distinction.
It's a bit far-fetched, I guess, then it's like reminding you to like really look at your hands, or it's always like,
oh, that's actually very cool. I didn't even think of that. Very nice, right? Libby just suggested about that. Maybe it's about like, whatever, look at your hands. Like I'm going to use my hands to build and do and create. And again, that there's something exciting. It's not just sad and wistful. I think there is that element in the Besamim, but I think there's also this embracing of we should be feeling as we make Havdallah and start our new week. I have the opportunity to build the Mishkan, right? To build space for God in my world. And I think that that's kind of the perspective to, sort of feel, again, I think there's also the other one, but also when making Havdallah to embrace. And especially I would say, I think it's a powerful message given that almost all of you are back in, right, with the exception of Eliza, and actually Rebecca maybe also, whatever, she me, so whatever, still here in the country, but not sitting in the Beit Midrash all the time. But point being is to not, yes, meaning, and I think there's the both elements. Yes, there is the sad, wistful element of Havdallah, the sad wistfulness of feeling like, oh, that I'm not here in Lindenbaum in the world of the Beit Midrash 24/7. So there is the Besamim element, and so wonderful that you're back and smelling the Besamim and like reviving yourselves. And I think there's the element of the Aish, of like, carry that with you and embrace what you're in. Don't only wistfully look back and like, oh, that was the, golden years and I have to be like, no, embrace it and feel like I have the opportunity to make a Kiddush Hashem wherever I am and to like use whatever skills I'm building in myself now and learning and whatever to like build space for God in this world in a way that I couldn't have if I didn't take these courses and learn these things and whatever it is. So I think it's really a model for all of life in many ways. anyway, yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to share. So thank you all for joining, and thank you also to Nina and Jackie. I'm really like so happy that you guys
Thank
were here.
you.
It's so awesome to see you. Really, like, thank you guys. I really mean it. Really like Shkaya. I know it's not easy on Zoom. It's so great to see you. So yeah, I hope you guys are well too. Yeah. Anyway, okay, you can go if you want or whatever. I want to also schmooze with them a bit more. So good to see you, Jackie. What are you up to?
It's really good to see you also. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Sure. I'm so glad. Yeah, but tell me, are you graduated? Are you still in college?
I'm graduating in May.
Wow, wow. Mazal tov. That's really awesome. Really, really so good to see you. All
Yeah, you too.
right, I'm gonna go schmooze and hear what
Can I
everybody's up to, but
ask
it's
you a quick
really like, thank you for
question?
joining.
Can I
sure.
ask you a question about what you were saying? So Heschel's idea in the Sabbath, do you think that it's more it's like the idea of prioritizing?
Oh, wait.
Time?
I feel bad. You know, it's really hard for me to hear you because everybody's talking. Can you send me a voice note and I'll respond on the voice note?
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Sorry, I just can't hear because I don't know if you hear all the noise around. I just can't hear you. Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. Just send me a voice note and I'll respond. Awesome, awesome. Thank you.